Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with a hot take on a Federalist article. 8-way public schools could further radicalize and when they finally reopen. So we're going to talk about that. You know, I'm big on education and what's going on in this country currently. So let's get into it. Smash like and subscribe. By the way, I have and Bitchute exclusive today. Like the really cool video I had to put on Bitchute because I can only talk about certain things on YouTube or they demonetize me, which they have. And they'll probably cancel me, which they will. So please subscribe to me at Bitchute and Rumble and check out the exclusive video today. If I do get yeeted from this channel, I do have a second backup channel. Which I will use then not to put videos, but just to announce that my other videos are running on BitChute and Rumble. Because once I get knocked off a channel I spent, I don't know, like a year or two building up, making some money, I'm out. I'm not going to build up another one and then get yeeted again. Who the hell can tell what the TOS is about? But anyhow, 8 ways public schools could further radicalize when they finally reopen. Now, I think this article is a little hyperbolic, but let's get into the 8 ways that the Federalist says this. Number 1, even more peer pressure to conform. I don't know where you get more, right? I mean, it's always been peer pressure to conform. Even when I was in school, I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate. It says our famine of social connection will likely spark a greater tolerance for blind conformity. There's been a mass starvation for peer connection among students. Many have been numbed by the drudgery of online learning with no outlets through sports and clubs, no human contact with teachers and peers. I don't know if it's worse, but because keep in mind, even though they have that lack of contact, like in-person contact, you know, kids have a way of using the internet on their own in ways that have nothing to do with school to communicate. You know, they communicate through games, through various social media platforms, and they tend to go for the newer ones and not the older ones. The older ones are for old people. You know, Facebook to a teenager, I don't even think they're starting Facebooks anymore. Not really. It's not a thing anymore. That's for older people. That's for people who have their own business and, you know, grandma's finally on Facebook and can see pictures and stuff. You know, so I don't know if this is a thing. TikTok does worry me, though, because TikTok is a thing for younger people, and they're communicating through that, and the Chinese run that up and down. Should have banned it. Should have banned it, Trump. Even more pressure to conform, maybe a little more. Maybe. I think it's not the biggest fish to fry here. Number 2, less engaged parents. Again, this has always been a problem. When I got out of college in the early, late 80s, early 90s, you know, I went back and I started substitute teaching, and man, they weren't very engaged then. They're not much more engaged now. You could probably argue they're less engaged, but I mean, if anything, they're forced to be more engaged because these kids have to learn at home and they can actually see what they're learning. But they say there has been a marked increase in homeschooling during the past year's school's closure, as well as a huge uptick in positive attitudes towards homeschooling. Parents who are now fleeing online public schooling may well continue homeschooling after the government reopens. So this is a good thing, I think. I think they're more engaged parents. I mean, if you've gone from sending your kids to school to homeschooling, I think that's great. Because I think kids will learn better from you. I do. At this point in history. There was a time when that wasn't the case, but now is different. Now is different. The amount of stuff you have out there on the internet that you can use to teach your kid, now you can be wrong, but so can the idiots who teach your kids at public schools. They're wrong all the time, but they're wrong in mass. When they're wrong, you know, the entire school's wrong. When you're wrong, yeah, your kid may have learned the wrong thing or whatever. Maybe he's learned your biases or whatever. That's probably going to happen anyway. But, look at what rich people do. They send their kids to private school. They don't send their kids to public school. Only Jimmy Carter did that. Jimmy Carter, for all his faults, I thought he was a decent guy, or tried to be. He sent his kid to public school. So, he believed, it showed me he believed in the system. That he believed that his kid could get just as good as an education as your kid. You think Biden's going to send his grandkids or his great-grandkids, because he's like a friggin' mummy, to public schools? No way. The Bidens will send their kids to private school all day long. And not, look at Obama. Obama did that. He couldn't wait to do that. Send his kids to private school. I thought that was dumb of him, I understand why he did it. Private school's better education. But then don't turn around and talk about, you should use the private school. The private school system is great. No, I think this is they're more engaged parents, especially if you're doing homeschooling. If you're just dropping your kids off or keeping them inside and say, well, stare at the computer for 8 hours, kid, then yeah, you're less engaged. Number 3, accelerated left-wing radicalism. Well, yes, absolutely. There's definitely more left-wing radicalism in the schools. There always has been. They were very left when I was in it early on. Not as much so, but now it's much worse. It's much worse. And these school boards and Karens think, I'm going to do something really great. I'm going to rename the school, or I'm going to go to this protest. They should be forbidden from engaging politically, representing the school in any way. It's just not right. They are teaching kids, and they do not care if they are ignoring you. That's been evident, especially in these blue states, like in California, where the San Diego board got caught saying stuff on a Zoom call, and a few others did. They want to teach critical race theory because they're so caught up into, I'm so woke and wonderful. I'm into critical race theory. Are you? Oh, of course I am. That's the way they are. It's like, a bunch of high schoolers caught up in the trend. That's what they're like. So if you have a kid in school, if you're not homeschooling them, you need to push back against this kind of stuff. They shouldn't be renaming a school. They shouldn't be pushing critical race theory, and they definitely should not be teaching the 1619 project, which is even worse than critical race theory because it doesn't even conform to facts. Critical race theory really doesn't either. It teaches racism, in my view, but 1619 is just, it's woke-tarded. It's woke-tarded. You're essentially teaching, you'd be better off the kid not get an education than let them learn the 1619 project. Illinois now requires teachers to indoctrinate students in leftist propaganda of critical race theory and gender ideology, among other things. I'm not sure how true that is statewide, but it sounds like something Illinois would do. You got to crack down on that. The only upside to this whole thing is these idiots teach left-wing radicalism to these kids. Then they teach them left-wing radicalism, and then the kids protest against it because they are teaching them to protest everything. So they end up, again, the left eats its own, and this is how they create that cycle, in part. So they're going to have even more radicalized kids who want to tear down the school. And I assume teachers who will stand by the sidelines as the school burns going, yes, yes, yes. So these teachers should be fired. These school board members should be fired. If they teach anything like critical race theory, 1619 project, you should be livid. You should be at the school board meeting saying, no, fire these people. This is racism. And it is. Harder fight for decent families, number 4. Engaged parents who hope to swim against the tide in their public schools may find they are not up to the fight. they and their children are certain to be increasingly marginalized, particularly as radical reformers push new ideology meant to abolish another systematic social problem and family privilege. Yeah, it's true. Um, the BLM organization had the deconstruction of nuclear families on its website, and then they realized how terrible that looked and took it down. But they had it up there, and they were all about it. They still are all about it, I believe, because they're a bunch of Marxists. So don't let these people push that on you. Be proud of your family, regardless of its race, and tell these people that you will not tolerate your kid in this school if you can. And some of you out there, you're like, oh, there's no way I could take my kid out of school and homeschool him. I need the money, whatever. But you can stand up. They listen to parents. When a parent complains, believe me, everybody in the administration goes, oh, no. Even if you do it again and again and again, and they'll do anything to make you stop showing up to the school. They'll do anything. They'll appease you in any way they can. Even if they have to create a special class for your school, if it keeps you from showing up and complaining, trust me, they hear complaints. They don't like them. It disrupts their day. So don't just sit there, complain to your school. Take meetings with the principal, and don't give an inch to these people. Don't let them tell you anything. Say, no, I don't want my kid taught critical race theory. It's wrong. When they say, well, we're just teaching them blah, 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 blah. Say, no, it's racism. You're not teaching my kid racism, and you're not teaching it in this school. That's what you say to them. Be that determined. They'll back down. They're weak. They're bureaucrats. Converting students into activists. Yes, they do this all the time. Schools will increasingly use students as agitators for social change. I mean, we saw this over and over again. Gun control marches, of course, crisis strikes, and all this other stuff. The upside to this, of course, is the students really don't care. Most of them really don't care. They do it because their teacher is giving them a day off or a day out of class, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm totally into climate crisis stuff. Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm an environmentalist, and I'm not going to be here on Friday. Watch me be environmentalist. And then they go off and play video games. Most of these teachers are too woke-tarded and too anxious to get these students on board. They'll accept anything. And that's a tip for you, students. If you want to get out of class and get good grades, just tell these woke-tards what they want to hear. And they'll just open the doors wide for you because they're stupid. They are so anxious to want to believe that you have swallowed their indoctrination and that you think it's amazing. So all you have to do is lie right to their faces. But be warned, when they figure out you're lying to them, they'll come down on you. They will come down on you. Don't try to correct them. I wouldn't recommend that at all. I wouldn't recommend any kind of direct confrontation with these teachers. They will punish you. Because understand that the true left-wing radicals, they believe it's okay to subvert the system. They believe it's okay to lie. They believe it's okay to be dishonest, and they will be. So be prepared for that. Be absolutely prepared. I would, if I was going to confront a teacher, now you have to check the laws in your state. In New Jersey, I believe we are a one-party state in terms of recording conversations, meaning that if you're in the conversation, you can record it if you give yourself permission. In some states, you are a two-party state, and it's illegal for you to record a conversation unless they also know about it. If you're unsure, what you could do is if you have a conference with a teacher, just tell them, I'll be recording this. And make sure you say that on tape, and they acknowledge that. Okay? But I would record all instances with the teacher if you're dealing with a truly radical lefty. A truly radical lefty. And they will probably incriminate themselves on the recording because they just don't care. They're so caught up in their nonsense, they just don't care. But protect yourself in that way, especially if you're going to go up against them. Just understand they're willing to lie. Longer school hours. School hours will increase, bleeding into mandatory summer school and other programs to keep kids in school as long as possible. Joe Biden's Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, recently released his 5-point plan for reopening school, which includes the need for making up lost time in order to level the playing field. Um, they have been talking about this for years, extending school through the summer. I think it's a dumb idea at this point. Um, you know, you're talking about on the one hand, it would be great if they extended the school year, but cut back on the actual hours kids were in school, if you know what I mean. Maybe give them more time for other things or projects or do their homework in the school, kind of spread out the work. But, a lot of schools aren't even air conditioned. And there's a reason for that because they're usually not open in the summer. So you're talking an added expense of, air conditioning. A lot of these schools don't have it. And part of the main problem with school, I think these days, is they just don't enforce the rules anymore. It's a factory to crank kids out. It'd be different is if it was like we supposedly enforce the law, right? You have to enforce the grades. You have to get so many points. But what happens is if a kid is like 2 points away from graduating or getting into the next grade, the parents will show up. They'll lobby his case. They'll give him some sort of makeup test, and they'll just put him over the edge. And that's turned into, over the years, push the kid to the next grade. Just push him to the next grade. If he's sincere, you can push him, and that's fine. It's not about teaching your kid, because some kids, they just learn at a different pace, or they're having trouble learning. They shouldn't be in a regular class. They need more time, or they're living in a dysfunctional home life, and the school's not going to spend the money to give them the individual attention they need. So they just crank them through. Meanwhile, he drains the time and energy from the teacher in a regular class because he's not getting attention at home, and he just makes it worse for everybody. So there's no easy answer here other than, you got to watch out for your own kid, And I don't know if longer school hours really is the solution. I really don't. I don't know. I've gone back and forth. At one point, I thought yes. Yeah, I don't know. Just seems like more of the same. We need more quality, not quantity, in the schools. We definitely need to get all this woke nonsense out, number one. Number two, I think we need to abolish teacher unions. Or, if you're not going to abolish the unions, then get rid of government schools. Make them all private. If you made them all private, then you could have, mandatory school however you want, right? You could even have schools that, would be more custom for each parent, right? You would have certain qualifications. Maybe you'd have some minimum qualification test that kids would have to take, and you could have that run by the government, let's say, right? So say you would have maybe every 3 years a kind of SAT score that each private school would have to make sure their kid knew enough to pass that test. And then you go take that test, you pass it, you go on to the next grade, and it's, if a school is failing a bunch of kids in that area, well, then there's a problem with that school. Their rating goes down or whatever. Then people stop going there. People stop sending their kids there. And now they have to go back and, teach their kids other things. And you could give out a high school diploma regardless of whether or not they pass certain grades, but you could rate it according to how many grades they actually did pass, right? So advanced kids, maybe they skip a couple of grades, and you graduate with, say, a level 14 high school diploma, showing that you're actually reading at a college level or whatever. Whereas a kid who maybe didn't do so well, got left back a few times, maybe graduates with an 8th or ninth level degree, high school degree, which is perfectly fine if he's going into a trade, and there'd be like a spectrum of requirements there. I mean, you could jimmy it a little bit differently. So, because I would meet kids when I was a substitute, they were going to be mechanics and stuff, right? And they were they weren't dumb guys, but they didn't like school. They didn't like doing work. I met this one kid, I always tell about it. He was in 8th grade, and he was stuck in an art class, and the teacher was making him hate art, and it broke my heart, because here was a kid who's a mechanic, right? He wants to work on cars. He's working in his dad's shop. He should have at least some level of joy for art, because at least, you know, and I said to him, I said, what about a paint job on a car? You know, you could do some really cool stuff with that. And he went, yeah. But he was, the teacher in that class was making him hate art, because she was teaching out of a book, and it was ridiculous. So, you know, he wasn't getting an education. You know, he was totally checked out. He was going to cruise through another 4 years of high school until he graduated. He's probably graduated now. And, you know, he's working in his dad's shop. He could have started working in his dad's shop, you know, probably by that grade. He was already working in there. So, increased isolation even back at school. Yeah. You know, the beer virus is going to do that. Until we get past all this stuff. And I don't know when it's going to happen. I really don't. I mean, I'm hoping this year. I'm hoping this is the year people just get fed up and stop. You know, enough states open and enough beer virus deaths plummet between the changing of the parameters, and you know, people just, you know, the polling just shows them, everybody's sick of this, and the Democrats go, okay, we're on to the next thing. That's the only way I think it's going to happen. I think they're going to go, well, we're on to the next thing. You know, I hope enough states stand up to the Democrats, or at the very least, you know, maybe by 2022, the Republicans take back the Congress, and it just stops in its tracks, and the Republicans open everything up, and then, you know, they won't be afraid, because then they could blame everything on Biden. So we'll see. In the meantime, you know, just try to keep your kid as happy as possible, I guess. And finally, more school invasion of children's private life. Yeah. I mean, getting into the computers with a school, I mean, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. Be careful when you do a Zoom call. Make sure you shut the damn thing off. You don't want to end up like Jeffrey Toobin. Make sure it's off, and make sure, I mean, kids, you should know better on computers than adults. So, but, you know, as it says here, be careful what you wish for, you know, in terms of opening the damn schools, because you're going back to that mindset of indoctrination. And it really has become that. You know, when I was in school, a lot of the teachers, they just wanted to teach, and that was it. But these days, you got a lot of left-wing radicals in there. All right, I got to take this call. See you in the next video.